questions, Deputy.
Thanks, Cahirlook, and thanks to our delegation for coming in this morning on what is a really important issue and putting communities right across the state under huge amounts of anxiety, stress, concern and fear, it has to be said, as to the whole handling of education, what appears to be a very poor forward planning process that's in place, and certainly that's very evident in my own constituency of Wicklow. So I just want to ask, firstly, how do you sum up the current approach by the department in terms of forward planning, school places, and the progression of new builds? So sum up the current approach briefly.
So thank you, Deputy, for your question, and I absolutely acknowledge that there are families around the country that have concerns, but I would seek to reassure, Deputy, and obviously you're from one of the constituencies that has had a problem, but can I say we know that the country is divided up into 314 school planning areas, and we know the data shows us that the planning has absolutely worked in those. There are typically about 10 school planning areas every year where there is a problem. So the vast majority, we have nearly 1 million children and young people in schools, and the vast majority of those get a place and there isn't a problem. But in up to that 10 school planning areas, generally for reasons of very accelerated population growth, there can on occasion be a problem. But part of the problem is not actually that there aren't enough places, full stop. It's often just duplication. So a significant contributor to it is that parents are applying to a number of different schools. So in one area recently, for example, we found out that when we eliminated the duplication, immediately that was 50% less places than we needed. There is significant planning and we can, and Deputy, you are advocating on behalf of your constituents and others across the country. I can absolutely assure that we will provide a school place for every child, be it a child that's attending mainstream school with full ability or somebody who has special educational needs. We will provide a place for them.
You say planning has worked. It hasn't worked. It's failed. Forward planning has fundamentally failed. Wicklow is one example of that. And there's many other examples across the state. I just want to read a quick letter I got from a pupil in Wicklow of only this Monday. So it's very brief. He says, "Hello, my name is," I'm not going to give his name for obvious reasons, "and I go to St. Patrick's National School. I really love the school, and I'm currently in, and I've made loads of friends since moving schools. This year I have to move schools again since I'm going to secondary school. But the problem is I don't have a place in a school yet. Every one of my friends do, and I'm the only one about 6 classes in my school that does not have a place. This makes me feel a bit left out. I really hope that in the future I get a place in a secondary school close to home, like for example St. David's or Temple Carrick, and not one that is far away all the way in Kilcool. I hope that soon I will have a place in a secondary school and I'm able to tell my friends and not have to worry about it anymore." So that's from a 6th class pupil, and that is very, very evident as to how he has been failed, and many other pupils right across the state, not just in Greystone. So the system is not working. So he is on a list, 78 on a list for St. David's School. He's 71st on the list for Temple Carrick. Last week we had the Taoiseach come out and saying he solved the issue. Every child in that area now has a school place. This letter arrived on Monday. He is one of at least 12 pupils in that area still without a school place. So what do you say to that pupil and to his parents and the parents and pupils similar to him that don't have a school place, not just in Greystones, but in other places across the state? Do you stand over the remark that the planning process in the department is working?
So, Deputy, look, again, the planning system is working overall. As I mentioned, for 314 school planning areas, there are less than 10 typically that have a problem. So most children and young people across the country get a school place. They may not always get their first place. It may not be their first preference, but they will get a school in their locality. I'm not saying that we have it perfect, absolutely not. And I do genuinely empathise with that young person. I have teenagers of my own, and I know how important it is for them to have advance notice, to know where they're going. Preferably, they want to go somewhere where there's some of their peers. In your particular area, we have established extra places. There's an extra class in Greystones Community College. I know he mentions a different school. We are working really hard. Ideally, we'd like to have every single young person sorted out much earlier in the year, but in the next few weeks, we believe we will have sorted out children.
Ms McNally, look, this is an annual reoccurrence. This isn't a one-off reoccurrence in the Greystones area. So, you know,
I think, Deputy,
unfortunately, your words ring hollow to this pupil, his family and the other families who are in a similar situation to the parents, the pupils of last year and the year before and the year before. So it's a cyclical failure by the department to deal with this. I just want to ask in terms of the forward planning piece that you say is working. So we know in Greystones, for example, again, the population target has already exceeded the target that it was to achieve by 2030. So 6 years prior to achieving the population target, you know, planning applications are now being refused by the local authority because they've exceeded the 2030 target. So what kind of interaction is there with Wicklow County Council and other, you know, local authorities around that kind of forward planning piece? Because again, there seems to be a real failure here, you know, to say, look, we don't have the school places here. You know, there needs to be brakes put on here in terms of absolutely we need houses, but we also need the critical infrastructure such as school places. And we have a problem here. We're not in a position to be able to provide those school places. So what kind of interaction is happening there with local authorities such as Wicklow County Council? Okay.
So look, Deputy, I do have to respectfully disagree with you that the whole system is a failure. As I said, nearly 1 million children and young people in the system at any one time, 120, 130,000 children coming in at junior infants or first year every year. And the vast, vast, vast majority, I don't want to mislead parents out there, the vast, vast majority of those do get a school place because we are planning years out. But there are, and you identified yourself in that particular area, that even the local authority itself didn't see the amount of expansion coming. They didn't see the intense, the volume that was coming. It came quicker and it wasn't foretold. We work really closely.
They did see it. You know, there's a planning process there. There's, you know, population targets laid down, so they seen it. So there was a real failure here to plan properly, both from the department and from the local authorities' perspective. There was no kind of joined up thinking, let's say, you know, and education is one thing. There's other areas that have failed here, you know, in terms of amenities, but the failure to put in place school places is a basic and fundamental I suppose, right that pupils should have, and they've been failed.
So, Deputy, I could ask my colleague Hubert Loftus to come in later if you have time, and he will outline the massive growth in the number of places, the number of schools in Wicklow that have seen expansion, the number of new schools, the primary and post-primary, the extra places that are there. So. Okay. There is a lot being done, and you asked about local authorities, and we work very closely with the local authorities to plan. We contribute to development plans.
Clearly, in this case, not close enough. I just want to move on to another area, and that's the whole, you know, use of prefabs. Again, what I'd say is a failure to put in place the school builds in a timely and efficient manner. So, can I just ask? I have the figures here from 2022. The cost of providing prefabs or modular temporary accommodation for schools was 28.1 million. Do we have the figure for 2023?
So can I just say, first of all, Deputy, that temporary accommodation is sometimes necessary and able to be responsive, as you've identified, when there is population growth, when there's a spike in demographics in an area, when there's an increase in prevalence of special ed. Temporary accommodation is needed, and that is sometimes how we serve children. But we always look at the most sustainable measure possible, the most cost-effective measure possible. So in 2023, we so in 21 we spent 29 million in current expenditure on rental. And 41 million in 22, 43 million in current. You will know that there is a massive increase in demographics, so we are serving more children. We're serving 18,200 Ukrainians that weren't there at this time.
Sorry, 43 million in
2023.
Okay, so a significant increase. And can I ask, that was for rental?
That's for rental.
And for purchase of modular units?
I will get you that number because we are investing a significant amount in modular. That's about 19% of our budget. I'll get you that exact number in a moment. But again, I would say that is to respond to Ukraine, to special educational needs, and the spike that we've seen in demographics in some areas.
In terms of rental of space and other types of properties for temporary provision of educational purposes, do we have figures for 2023 in terms of renting private space to put these modular units?
So just in terms of rental, as you know, the committee a number of years ago looked at and asked us to do a real in-depth look at the use of rental properties for over 5 years, and we have since done a huge amount of work on that. So back in February 21, there were 396 schools with rented prefabs for more than 5 years. That's reduced to 219 in April 24, so there is a significant reduction.
Okay, and do we have a figure how much in terms of cost to purchase those modular units?
I will, yes. Yeah, I can ask my colleague to come in here, but modular, the spend in 2023 was 281.9 million.
281 million.
Yeah, and can I just explain, that's on modular, that is on modular.
Do we have a figure then for rent and land premises to put these modulars in 2023?
Can I come back just on the modular first of all and explain that that isn't temporary accommodation, that is, we use modular accommodation for permanent accommodation. It's very accepted internationally and in fact encouraged internationally that we use modern methods of construction, that there is value for money, there's also climate benefits. So that modular isn't temporary accommodation, much of that is permanent.
The point here, not to just go back to Wicklow all the time, but where that modular units are going in is predominantly on land not owned by the department. So again, to ask the question, how much is it costing to put that modular, which you're saying isn't permanent, but in many cases it is of a temporary nature in terms of the location. So how much does it cost to put that modular units on renting space to put it?
So Deputy, most of the building that we're doing, we're not paying for. So some of the land that we're putting that on is minister owned, but in many instances, in most instances, it's owned by patrons. So we're putting that on to the land of patrons. We're not paying a rent on it. The patrons are giving us access.
Just to go back to the Wicklow situation where land is being rented from a rugby club, it's being rented from a GAA club, it's being rented from a tennis club.
They're very small numbers, Deputy, overall.
Small numbers, but I mean, in Wicklow, in 1 year, it costs €6 million to provide temporary accommodation in terms of renting land, renting prefabs, etc. So, you know, that is not value for money in my books.
But Deputy,
that is a failure by the department and a failure to forward plan in terms of providing, you know, educational, education for pupils who, as a right, should have it in appropriate settings.
And Deputy,
I'll give you an example here. And one of my daughters, she started in primary school in a prefab, totally unfit for purpose. Secondary school in a prefab. She went to college in Maynooth. She was educated in a prefab in Maynooth. Throughout her whole education, she was educated in prefab. She's now a primary school teacher. So after 18 years of education, it was only when she became a primary school teacher did she actually step foot into a purpose-built classroom. And that is a real failure. And there's pupils like her right across the state that are being systematically failed by the state in terms of the provision of education, but also the provision of, you know, I suppose, subjects and choices, particularly in secondary school. So there's a real failure here by the department. There's certainly no efficiency whatsoever and a real failure of forward planning.
So Deputy, could I come back in on that and just say, because you mentioned the word failure a lot, and I have to counter that a little bit. Accepting absolutely that there are problems in many areas. I absolutely accept that. But I think first and foremost, you opened this discussion by talking about us needing places. So we do everything we can to ensure that every child gets a place. And sometimes in a small, and we can give you numbers on that, in a small number of relatively to the 1 million children that are in the system, we have to rent. We have to spend money on rental. But that can be justified. We are doing everything we can to minimise it. But our first priority is to make sure that children and young people have a school place. And that is what we do. And just secondly, if you don't mind, you know, you mentioned about failing children and young people. The facts of the matter are, Deputy, that we have the quality of the education system in Ireland is the envy of around the world, and we have hard data that shows that we do provide high quality education.
Just to finish, and I'll try to come back in on this. When you have the Children's Ombudsman come in and saying there's an unacceptable level of stress, particularly for those children with special needs, when you have the Children's Ombudsman saying that, and when you have a figure of over €320 million being spent last year in terms of provision of temporary and modular accommodation, I think that speaks volumes in terms of failure by the department and the Minister to forward plan and put in place an appropriate education for our children.
Thanks.